Hey guys, Mr. Shaw here. Just wanted to make a quick video for you to kind of cover some gaps in the book, some things that AP has said are important, and the book really didn't cover them very well. So I just want to kind of throw a few things out here. Some things you'll know already, some things you might have heard about. I just want to go a little bit more in depth for you to make sure you guys are good to go. So let's get to it. Our enduring understanding for this one is the Republican ideal in the United States is manifested in the structure and operation of the legislative branch. So we're kind of we're like looking at the legislative branch and figuring out how that really shows the idea of republicanism. Again, talking about representation, our representatives specifically today. The learning objectives we're going to cover, we're going to compare the Senate and the House of Representatives in terms of how constituencies, lawmaking authority, and chamber rules and roles affect the policymaking process. We're also going to explain how congressional behavior is influenced by election processes, partisanship, and divided government. And we're also going to explain how Congress uses its oversight power in its relationship with the executive branch, meaning the president. So the main thing here, guys, is I'm not going to cover everything about the legislative branch. You guys know already about enumerated powers, implied powers, all kinds of stuff like about Congress, but there's a few specifics that you might not know. So that's what we're going to start with. So specifically, let's talk about the differences among the chambers, and we're just going to kind of start in general. So you guys already know the first ones for the House and the Senate. The House is based on population of the states. That's why it is larger. We have 435 members in our current House of Representatives. The Senate is made to represent the states equally. That's why it's only 100 members. Because of its size, the House of Representatives has to have really formal rules for debate, and that you can't break the rules at all. If you do break the rules, you can actually be forcibly removed from the House of Representatives and not be able to participate, and it just makes you look bad. You wouldn't want to do that. Since the Senate's a little bit smaller, debate is a little bit less formal. We'll get to that in a second, and that's going to be it's going to allow a lot more freedom to senators to, I guess, kind of play with the rules a little bit. So we'll see what happens there in a second. The other thing about the House and the Senate, as far as general rules go, since we have a longer term in the Senate, it's a lot easier for them to establish longer, or like I guess more like solidified coalitions. So the word coalition just literally means group. So in both the House and the Senate, they have what are called caucuses, and that's different from the kind of election caucuses we'll learn about later. But the caucuses are just basically groups of people that come together for specific interests. So there's a Republican caucus, there's a Democratic caucus, there's also caucuses for like women and minorities, and all, or like the environment, any kind of thing like that is probably going to have some sort of caucus. But the biggest ones are going to be the ones that are just divided along party lines. Since the Senate has a longer term, they have a lot more ability to create these really strong coalitions. But since the House of Representatives, every single person is up for re-election every 2 years, they don't really have that same ability. They are still able to create really strong caucuses, but and that's mostly because they have a really high election or re-election rate because of the advantages of incumbency, which you guys already read about. But the Senate are the ones with the definitely the stronger coalitions, the stronger caucuses that we'll see. Right, so transitioning into the responsibilities for the different chambers, first up for the House of Representatives is that any tax bill or revenue bill has to start in the House. And the idea here is that since the House of Representatives is closer to the people, they're getting reelected every 2 years, they are going to be like closer to what the people actually want. And if a congressman or a representative rather doesn't vote in a way that their constituents would like with in regard to revenue bills, well, the constituents can just vote them out in the next couple of years. So they don't have to deal with them for a very long time like you would in the Senate. The other thing they do is they select the president if no candidate wins a majority in the Electoral College. And that's really important just because the Electoral College, especially a lot recently, has been really heated battles. So we're like the House of Representatives could actually end up selecting the president, and there's actually really not very many rules for that. Like in the 1876 election, they established like a committee of 13 people or maybe, I think it was some sort of odd number, and it was mostly Republicans, and you wouldn't believe who won. It was the Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes. So that's really interesting. That's kind of a constitutional gray area, but that is a responsibility of the House. They also are going to impeach federal officers with or for bribery, treason, and high crimes and misdemeanors. And make sure you understand, guys, that the word impeach literally just means to charge with a crime. A lot of people mistakenly think that impeach means to remove from office, and that's not the case. So when you are impeached, you are literally just charged with a crime. Nothing bad has happened to you yet. You have not been kicked out, and in this case, you have to go to trial in the Senate, and then they will decide if you should get kicked out or not. So let's go ahead and transition over to the Senate. So they have the advice and consent power. Senators are going to recommend or reject major presidential nominees, nominees or appointees. Really, either one works. So, for example, for the cabinet, for federal judges, or even Supreme Court judges, the Senate is going to be in charge of advising the president. So, for example, if there was somebody from Missouri, or a judgeship like opening in Missouri, they would contact the senators, Roy Blunt and Claire McCaskill, and they would ask them who they should put forward. And they might not call it; it might just be like, "Hey, shoot an email to the president." Boy, that'd be cool. Anyway, but that's what would happen, is that they would advise the senators would advise the president on who to select, who to nominate for that position. The other thing that happens is that the Senate are the ones that confirm these appointees. So the president will appoint somebody, and then the Senate as a whole will confirm them or reject them. So that's really important too, just because that is a very, very important power for how our government runs, and that is what is going to fall under the Senate's responsibilities. The Senate also ratifies all treaties that the president makes with any foreign countries, and that, again, the treaty really doesn't take effect until the Senate has ratified it. So the president can do all of this work, and can try to get as many things in these treaties as possible. But if the Senate doesn't approve of it, then nothing really changes. Nothing happens, and that treaty is null and void, at least according to the United States. That happened after World War I with Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson drew up a lot of the Treaty of Versailles, and the Senate didn't approve of it. They didn't like the League of Nations, so they rejected the treaty, and the U.S. didn't join the League of Nations, even though it was Woodrow Wilson's idea. Last thing that's specific to the Senate is they hold the impeachment trial. As I mentioned, the House impeaches, and the Senate votes to either convict and remove the person, or to acquit them of the impeachment charge. So that's it. They decide whether or not to remove the official from office. Okay, next up, we're talking about the leadership. Guys, this is, you should already know most of this, but I wanted to just include it again just to make sure. In the House of Representatives, we have at the top the Speaker of the House. He or she is going to be the most important person, probably the most powerful person in all of Congress, to be honest with you. They are going to assign bills to committee. They will appoint committee chairs. A lot of times they are also going to be the majority party leader. I know that it says right under there that there is a separate majority party leader, but that person in the House of Representatives doesn't really have as much power as the Speaker. They are basically the leader of their party in the House of Representatives. The majority and minority leaders are going to be, again, leaders, as I mentioned, leaders of their party. They're going to kind of organize votes, make sure that everybody has they can introduce bills and make sure that they have enough votes to get those bills passed. And the whips are going to actually be they're like assistants to the leaders. They will make sure that everybody is going to kind of vote as they should, along with the party. And they can offer party endorsements or political favors, anything like that that is going to convince people to vote along with the party. They'll use that to sway people one way or another. So the only difference in the Senate, besides, again, obviously there's a few differences. The vice president is the president of the Senate, but they aren't necessarily there, especially in the modern era. The vice president doesn't really participate a whole lot, but they only vote in case of a tie. They will break that tie. The president pro tempore is the quote unquote, like it literally means like temporary president, but so they are the leader of the Senate, and they will run the meetings or like oversee the Senate itself or preside over the Senate. But they don't necessarily have to do that job. They will sometimes just appoint that to like some sort of junior senator and let them do it for the day. And again, that I didn't mention that with the Speaker of the House. The Speaker they preside over the Senate, or sorry, preside over the House of Representatives, just like the President pro tempore. And then the majority and minority leaders and the majority and minority whips are mostly the same. The only difference is that in the Senate, the majority leader is very, very powerful. They are the most powerful person in the Senate, much more powerful than the vice president or the president pro tempore, but not quite as powerful as the Speaker of the House of Representatives. All right, so there's a couple really specific rules for debate that are different, so I wanted to kind of touch on those real briefly. The first thing, let's first talk about the House, is that remember that it's supposed to be more formal, so representatives can speak for no longer than an hour. However, that does not apply to the Speaker of the House or the majority and minority leaders. They can only offer what are called germane amendments, which mean that the amendments have to apply to the bill in question. So if you're talking about a tax bill, you can't just all of a sudden bring up an amendment about the environment. Like that makes no sense. That is not a germane amendment. That does not apply to the bill, so that you can't do that. And the Speaker controls who speaks, and the representatives, after they have to refer to colleagues in the third person. Again, I don't know if you need to know that, but it's something that's specific you might need to know. I have no idea. So for example, when they address the Speaker, they have to say Mr. Speaker or Madam Speaker. When they refer to someone else, like a different person who had spoken previously, they have to say something like my esteemed colleague from Illinois, or the junior senator from Illinois, and they refer to the person. They can't just say their names. They will actually say more closely along to their title rather than their names. In the Senate, the senators can speak for as long as they want, and again, that leads us to the filibuster, which you guys should already know about. I'm not going to give you that definition here. Again, but I mean, at least I'm not going to write it. I'll tell you about it. The filibuster is when a senator literally talks a bill to death. Since there are no rules, a senator can do that, and nobody can stop them unless, more recently, they have a 3/5 vote. That's called a cloture vote. And that actually came up right around the 1915 to 1920 area, because there was Woodrow Wilson was trying to get things passed to help the war effort in World War I, and senators didn't want to do that, so they just filibustered it when there was no way to stop a filibuster before. I believe it was actually 1917. But anyway, so he called a session of Congress. He demanded that changes be made, so they created the cloture vote. Originally, it was 2/3. You had to have a 2/3 vote in order to end a filibuster, but it has since been relaxed to 3/5 vote, which means you need 60 senators in order to end a filibuster. They can also offer any amendments they want to bills, so it doesn't even have to apply to the bill in question. They can just say, "Hey, I want to add this bill or this amendment about the environment to this tax bill," and they have to kind of go along with it. They don't have to go along with it, but people can vote to add that amendment or not, whether whether it actually applies to the bill or not. The other thing that you guys probably haven't heard about is called unanimous consent of senators. And unanimous consent is used to suspend the rules and limit debate. So if you want something to move along quickly, or if you want to slow it down, you can ask for unanimous consent, and then everybody will, literally, they'll stop, they'll take a vote, and if everybody agrees to whatever proposal, like whether it's to shorten the debate or to extend the debate, if that is agreed upon, then so basically, if it's not agreed upon, then the bill is put on hold. So if it is agreed upon, then they continue as normal, and they might vote or they might continue debate depending on what they wanted to get accomplished. But if all senators don't consent, then the bill is put on hold, and then they will either come back to it later, or sometimes the bill dies. All right, so moving into chamber-specific procedures, I really only have things for the House of Representatives because they are, like I said, it's more formal, which means it has more rules. So let's go ahead and get to that. We'll talk about some gerrymandering and a few other things, and then we'll call it a day. So House of Representatives, they have what's known as the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is the most important committee in the House of Representatives. They are going to define guidelines for debate. They can decide the time that a bill is going to be debated. They will also decide the number of amendments that can be added to this bill. They decide when debates are going to take place. They decide when votes are going to take place. They can even rewrite and amend bills themselves. Guys, this is insane. Okay, they have so much power. Basically, nothing happens in the House of Representatives without the Rules Committee deciding that it's going to happen. So it is a very prestigious committee. You absolutely want to be a part of it. But the majority party has absolute control of the Rules Committee. So nothing, like I said, basically, I say nothing happens without the Rules Committee say so, but really it's nothing happens without the majority parties say so. The most powerful congressmen or representatives from the majority party are going to be on the Rules Committee. They're going to be making sure that things are happening as they want them to. Next up is the Ways and Means Committee. This is, again, also specific to the House. The Ways and Means Committee will determine tax policy. And anytime tax proposals come up, they are going to outline the details that are going to be put forward whenever they want to raise or lower income taxes. So again, really all you need to know is that they determine tax policy, and that is specific to the House of Representatives. Last thing for the committees of the House is called the Committee of the Whole, which is actually not a committee. It is more of a state of operation. So basically, since the rules are so formal, when they want to relax the rules so that a few representatives can debate for longer periods of time, they will call a meeting of the Committee of the Whole, and all they need is like 100 members present in order to do that. And so they'll call a committee of the whole, and then they can basically relax the rules for a little while, still chat about the bill or about the policy, whatever they're talking about, and then they can still make decisions. Now again, the whole House still has to vote on the bill or whatever policy they're talking about. But this is just kind of a way to hear some more diverse viewpoints. Actually, people like non-voting members of the House of Representatives. I don't know if you guys know that there are some non-voting members, such as from territories like Puerto Rico or Guam, and they are present, but they never have a vote. But in the Committee of the Whole, when they call a Committee of the Whole, those non-voting members they can actually speak during that time. Last thing about the House is the discharge petition. This is a really interesting tool. It is basically a device or a tool that is allowed to pull a bill out of a committee and bring it to the floor to debate. So, and all you need to do this is a simple majority vote. So basically, let's say that a committee they don't want to release a bill, they don't want to send it to the whole floor for debate, because maybe, let's say, the majority party is worried about this bill becoming public. They don't want it to be spoken about publicly. So what they'll do is they'll kind of hide it. They'll try to kill the bill in committee. And what the minority party can do, or if it's not maybe it's not necessarily a minority, but if there's popular support for the bill, they can issue a discharge petition, and then they will take a vote, and if a majority of people agree, that will pull the bill out of committee and go straight to the floor for debate. It doesn't necessarily mean that the bill is going to get passed, but it is something that it's just kind of a tool to use to make sure that the majority is not dominating the minority. Because on most committees, almost all committees actually, the majority party is going to have a majority on the committee. All right, so last thing before I forgot about that, we had to talk about the types of representatives. So last thing, and then we'll get into gerrymandering. So there's three types of representatives. The trustee is a representative that all, and again, before I get into definitions, this always refers to both like all types of congressmen, so senators and House members, and I'll tell you which one is which. So the trustee, they always vote for what constituents would want. They really don't let their personal views get in the way of their votes. And this is more common in the House of Representatives. Think about it. If you think about it, it makes sense because in the House, more people need to, like, they are up for re-election more often. So they need to make sure that they're making their constituents happy. A delegate, these are going to be someone who always votes along their personal views. So they don't really let their constituents into consideration, or like they don't really take their constituents into consideration very much. And this is going to be more common in the Senate. Remember, the Senate is more further removed from the people. They have 6-year terms, so they have a lot more ability to kind of make sure that they're doing what they think is right, rather than what their constituents think is right. So again, trustee is in the House, delegate is in the Senate more often. Again, these are really broad strokes, guys. Most often, people are going to be on the Politico type of representative. They are going to vote for what constituents want for things that their constituents care about. And then they're going to vote along their personal views for things that their constituents might not care about. So again, most people are probably going to be somewhere in the middle, something like a Politico, but the trustees closer to the House, delegates closer to the Senate. All right, so let's get into congressional behavior. Specifically, we're going to get into gerrymandering in a second. But you need to know that congressional behavior and the effectiveness of government are affected by two things. First of all, ideological divisions, and specifically, we're talking like conservative and liberal. These are going to lead to a lot of gridlock in Congress, and you're going to need to negotiate. You're going to need to compromise. The problem is that people who disagree with each other, especially currently, are not going to be very good at compromising. And the best part about American government, or the worst part, depending on your opinion, is that nobody's really right. Everybody thinks they're right, but there's no really one right answer. It's all just different opinions about how to run the government. So these elections are going to lead to a divided government. We've had a divided government ever since the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debate. But nowadays, and in the modern era, it's going to be much more partisan based. So in the past, if a senator didn't like, or if they were a different party than the president, they wouldn't block they wouldn't block one of their appointees because they were of a different party. If it was if the president had appointed somebody who was good, they would still allow that person to be confirmed. Now, though, they basically will not, like senators won't approve of somebody who is not in their party. So that, like currently, right now, we're seeing that Democrats are wanting to wait on this until the midterm elections for the Supreme Court justice nomination. They don't want Brett Kavanaugh to take that election, or to take that Supreme Court spot, because he's going to be there for the rest of his life or until he retires. So I mean, he might be a good Supreme Court judge, but the Democrats don't really care about that. They want to put somebody who agrees with them into that Supreme Court spot. And again, we saw the Republicans do that last or 2 years ago with Merrick Garland, who was an Obama nominee, and the Republicans just completely blocked the nomination. They didn't let it go through because they had just a difference of opinion in how the government should be run. All right, so the best part about congressional behavior, guys, is that they get to redraw their districts, and a lot of times, more recently, we have seen some gerrymandering take place, or gerrymandering, depending on how you say it. So gerrymandering is drawing district lines strangely to favor one party over another. And it's going to lead to an unequal like representation of constituencies. Basically, you are trying to draw the lines in such a way that's going to increase the voter turnout for one party over the not voter turnout, but like basically like you're going to draw it in such a way that it is going to favor one party over another. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. It's going to increase partisanship and also decrease accountability. So if you are like basically now most people who represent districts are going to be in like firm majorities in that district, or they're going to be in a district where a majority of people in that district are of the same party. And it's a lot harder for those people who are in that party to hold the representative accountable, because it's just they usually agree with them and are going to be a little bit more lenient about what that representative is doing in Congress because they agree with them ideologically. And by say they, I mean the constituents will agree with the representative ideologically. So gerrymandering is a big problem. It's been addressed in a couple cases. Before we get into the cases, I want to show you kind of what would happen. So in 2010, the Republicans they won 54% of the vote, and they were able to get they won 6 of 13 seats. And so that again, because that was based on how the lines were drawn here. Okay, so you see we've got a couple really big blue ones. Okay, and then everything's kind of equally drawn. There's not really anything that's like strangely drawn. So then you see like how they changed it is they changed this one here is the most dramatic one. This Democrat one they took and they spread out, okay, all through here, and they like kind of connected it in with these. So basically, the Republicans who they were helping redraw the boundaries. So they are kind of like trying to condense the Democrats into into as small of a section as possible. Oh, and I'm sorry. So I was going backwards. So what they did was they took they took this one and this one is all big up here, and they just kind of condensed it into this smaller one, and they're basically trying to pack as more Republicans into Democratic districts, and then just limit the amount of Democrats in every district. And if they can't, so for example, if they can't maximize the Republicans in this district, they're going to like make sure that this is like they're trying to concentrate the Democrats. So in this section here, the Democrats are definitely going to win because there's a high concentration of Democrats in that area. But you see beforehand, when it was more fairly drawn, the Democrats had more of a chance of winning these sections. So in 2 years, they were able just by redrawing the districts, the Republicans were able to take a lot more of the seats. Again, they took 9 out of 13 seats rather than 6, just because of redrawing the district lines. So sorry for repeating myself there. That was a terrible job of doing that. But again, that's kind of the bad part. It shows you kind of the bad part about gerrymandering. And it happens on both sides, guys, Republicans and Democrats alike. It's not like it's only Republicans or only Democrats. They both do it. All right, so let's get into the 2 court cases. So the first one was Baker v. Carr, and this is this is where they decided. We're going to talk a lot more about these in Congress or in class in Congress. So the Supreme Court in Baker v. Carr in 1961, they decided that the districts needed to have roughly the same amount of people. And it was in Baker v. Carr, and Reynolds v. Sims were the ones that actually did that, that decided that. Baker v. Carr is the more famous one. That is one of the Supreme Court cases that AP has definitely said you need to know. So they enshrined what's called the one person, one vote rule in American constitutional law, which meant that, again, since most in every district is going to have roughly the same amount of people, each person's vote is going to count the same towards the representatives. So that's Baker v. Carr. We'll learn more about that in class. And then the second one is Shaw v. Reno, which specifically deals with race. So if you're trying to delineate them, the easiest way is to remember Shaw v. Reno is about race, rather than Baker v. Carr is not about race and just about one vote, or one man, one vote. So anyway, Shaw v. Reno, it said that redistricting based on race must be held to a standard of strict scrutiny under the Equal Protection Clause, while bodies doing redistricting must be conscious of race to the extent that they must ensure compliance with the Voting Rights Act. Okay, what does that mean? Basically, when you are redistricting, you have to keep in mind, you have to keep race in mind when you're when you are redistricting. However, when you are specifically, like when you are redrawing the lines, you have to make sure that you are doing it properly, so as to not conflict with the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment, just because basically you can't unfairly represent one race, or you can't pack one race into one district so they don't, their votes don't count in other districts. And that's what ended up happening. This is what I'm showing you here, with this really packed tightly district. That was mostly African Americans, and African Americans traditionally in the last at least like 80 some odd years have voted Democrat ever since, and actually more than that, almost 90, since the Great Depression. So that the Supreme Court actually overturned this. They said that this district was unfairly drawn for African Americans, and they needed to redraw it because it was violating the Equal Protection Clause and not really corresponding to the Voting Rights Act, because they had they drawn this more fairly, then more of these districts would have had Democratic representatives. And again, we'll talk about this more in class. This is just kind of getting you started here with Shaw v. Reno. All right, last thing, guys, and I'm going to go through this real quick, is just congressional oversight. We talked about it's in the book briefly, but I want to make sure you guys know what we're talking about. Again, oversight and methods used by Congress. These are ensuring that legislation is implemented as intended, and they're going to do this in a couple ways. They're going to hold hearings where they will call in members of the executive branch or members of the bureaucracy to make sure that these laws are getting implemented appropriately. And they'll also talk about the power of the purse. So if a committee, or not committee, but like if an agency isn't doing something that is correct according to the legislative branch, they can limit their budget, or they'll be more likely to help change the budget later. And that's what power of the purse means, is just kind of controlling what money goes where. So the executive branch needs to make sure they're doing their job, or it could be likely that they will lose that funding, and they don't want to do that. And again, this is really the main use of curtailing presidential power. It is going to be a check against the executive and making sure that they are implementing the law appropriately. Okay, guys, that's it. Thanks for hanging out. See you in the next one. If we have a next one, I don't know. We'll see. Take it easy.